On the morning of September 17, 1985, a man walked through the gates of Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow, carrying nothing but a leather briefcase and a Soviet passport that identified him as Dmitry Volkov. The passport was genuine. The name was not. For 12 years, he had lived as Thomas Brennan, a mid-level analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency in Arlington, Virginia. He had owned a house with aluminum siding. He had mowed his lawn on Saturdays. He had waved to neighbors who believed he worked in government consulting, and for 12 years, every classified document he touched had been photographed, memorized, and transmitted to Moscow through dead drops. Encrypted cables and microfilm hidden inside hollowed-out batteries. Now, Thomas Brennan was dead. Dmitry Volkov had come home. The airport smelled like diesel and wet concrete. The September air carried the first bite of autumn, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Dmitry stood in the arrivals hall waiting for the extraction team that should have been there to meet him. Around him, travelers shuffled past weary faces, gray coats, the muted shuffle of Soviet life in motion. No one looked at him twice. No one smiled. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with the steady monotone of a country that had learned to keep its head down. He waited 20 minutes, then 30, then an hour. No one came. When he finally approached the taxi stand outside, a driver with a cigarette dangling from his lips glanced at his briefcase and asked where he was going. Dmitry gave an address in the Arbat district, a safe-house location he had been given during his training. Years ago, before he had been inserted into the United States with a fabricated identity and a mission that was supposed to last 5 years at most. The taxi driver shrugged and started the meter. Moscow passed by the window like a grayscale film. The buildings were tall and gray, the streets wide and empty. Billboards proclaimed the triumph of the Soviet worker. Buses lumbered past, their windows fogged with breath and exhaustion. Everything looked exactly as he remembered it, and yet it felt foreign, like a photograph of a place he had once known but could no longer touch. When they reached the address, Dmitry paid with American dollars. The driver took them without comment and drove away, leaving him standing alone on a sidewalk lined with leafless trees. The building was a 5-story concrete block, identical to a dozen others on the same street. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on apartment 12, using the coded rhythm he had been taught. 2 quick knocks, a pause, then 3 more. No one answered. He knocked again. Still nothing. He tried the handle. The door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was empty. Not abandoned. The walls were freshly painted. The floors were clean. There was no furniture, no belongings, no sign that anyone had ever lived there. Even the light fixtures had been removed, leaving only bare wires hanging from the ceiling like exposed nerves. Dmitry stood in the center of the empty living room, listening to the silence. Somewhere in the building, a pipe rattled. A door slammed. Footsteps echoed down the hallway outside and then faded away. He left the apartment and walked back down to the street. The sun was setting behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the pavement. He hailed another taxi and gave a different address this time, his own. The apartment where his wife and 2 children should have been waiting for him. The home he had dreamed about during 12 years of exile. 12 years of pretending to be someone else. 12 years of lying to everyone he met. The apartment was in a workers' district on the outskirts of Moscow, in a cluster of prefabricated housing blocks built during the Khrushchev era. He remembered the number by heart, Building 7, Apartment 34. He remembered the view from the kitchen window, a narrow courtyard where children played in the summer and babushkas hung laundry on sagging lines. He remembered his wife's voice, the way she hummed while cooking. He remembered his son's laughter, his daughter's small hand in his. The taxi stopped in front of Building 7. Dmitry paid and stepped out into the cold. The building looked the same. 6 stories, pale yellow paint peeling near the edges, narrow windows with iron balconies. He climbed the stairs slowly, counting each step, feeling the weight of anticipation press against his chest like a hand. When he reached the 3rd floor, he stopped in front of Apartment 34 and stared at the door. It was painted green, He didn't remember it being green. He knocked. Once. Twice. Then harder. The door opened, and a woman stood in the threshold, a stranger. She was in her 50s, wearing a faded housecoat and slippers. She looked at him with mild suspicion. "Yes? I'm sorry," Dmitri said slowly. "I think I have the wrong apartment. What number are you looking for?" 34. "This is 34. He stared at her. "How long have you lived here?" 8 years, she said. "Why?" "I'm looking for someone. A woman. Irina Volkova. And 2 children." The woman frowned. "I don't know anyone by that name. She lived here," Dmitri insisted, "with our son and daughter." "This was our apartment." The woman's expression shifted from suspicion to pity. "I'm sorry, comrade, but I've lived here since 1977. There was no one here before me. The apartment was assigned to me by the housing committee. It was empty when I moved in." Dmitri felt something cold settle in his stomach. "That's impossible." "I'm sorry," the woman said again, and this time her voice was softer. "Perhaps you should check with the housing office. Maybe they moved." She closed the door gently, and he heard the lock click into place. He stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the green door. Then he turned and walked back down the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the stairwell like a heartbeat. The Cold War was not fought with tanks and bombs alone. It was fought in the shadows, in the silence between words, in the empty spaces where trust used to be. It was a war of information and paranoia, where the most dangerous weapon was not a missile, but a lie, and the most effective soldiers were those who could live inside that lie without ever breaking. By 1985, the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union had become a fact of life, as ordinary and inescapable as gravity. The nuclear arsenals on both sides had grown so vast that military analysts spoke not of victory, but of mutually assured destruction, a doctrine built on the certainty that any first strike would be answered with total annihilation. The world had learned to live on the edge of the abyss, balancing carefully, never looking down. But beneath the surface of diplomatic summits and arms control negotiations, another war was being waged, a war of espionage and counterintelligence, where the battlefield was every government office, every research laboratory, every military base. The KGB and the CIA fought for scraps of information, each side trying to peer into the other's plans, to know what the enemy was thinking before the enemy knew it themselves. Agents were inserted deep into foreign soil, living under false identities for years, sometimes decades. They married, had children, built lives that looked ordinary from the outside. They attended parent-teacher conferences and neighborhood barbecues. They filed taxes and complained about traffic. And all the while they fed secrets back to their handlers' blueprints. Troop movements, encryption codes, the mundane details that, when pieced together, could reveal the shape of an entire strategy. Dmitry Volkov had been one of those agents. He had been recruited by the KGB in 1971 when he was 23 years old, fresh out of Moscow State University with a degree in linguistics and a perfect score on every psychological evaluation. He had been told he was being trained for special work in service of the motherland. He had been taught English until he spoke it without an accent. He had been given a new identity, complete with a birth certificate, school records, and a fabricated childhood in a small town in Ohio that no one would bother to verify. In 1973, he had been sent to the United States with instructions to build a life, to blend in, to wait. For the first 2 years, he did nothing but exist. He worked as a translator for a small import-export firm. He rented an apartment in Alexandria. He learned to drink coffee instead of tea, to say buddy and sure thing, to complain about the Washington Redskins. He became Thomas Brennan, and Thomas Brennan became real. In 1975, he applied for a job at the Defense Intelligence Agency. His language skills and academic background made him an ideal candidate for a low-level analyst position. He was hired without incident. 6 months later, he was given a security clearance. 2 years after that, he was promoted. And for the next decade, Thomas Brennan fed information to Moscow. Not everything, he was too careful for that. But enough. Satellite reconnaissance schedules, personnel rosters, internal memos about Soviet military capabilities. Small pieces, each one insignificant on its own. But together they formed a mosaic that allowed Soviet strategists to see through the fog of American secrecy. He had been good at his job. Too good. And in the summer of 1985, something went wrong. He never found out exactly what had blown his cover. Maybe it was a defector who named him. Maybe it was a routine security review that caught an inconsistency in his background. Maybe it was simply bad luck, a surveillance camera in the wrong place at the wrong time. A neighbor who noticed something off, a pattern in his movements that triggered an algorithm somewhere in the vast machinery of counterintelligence. What he knew was this. One morning in July, he arrived at work to find two men waiting for him in the parking lot. They didn't identify themselves. They didn't need to. He saw the way they stood, the way their eyes tracked his movements, and he knew. He had 30 seconds to decide. He turned and walked away. Not fast, not slow. Just a man who had forgotten something in his car. He drove out of the parking lot, merged into traffic, and kept driving. By noon, he was in Philadelphia. By evening, he was in New York. By midnight, he was in a safe house in Brooklyn, making contact with his emergency handler and requesting immediate extraction. 3 days later, he was on a cargo ship bound for Murmansk, hidden in a shipping container filled with industrial parts. The crossing took 11 days. He spent most of it in darkness, listening to the groan of the hull and the crash of the waves, wondering if he would ever see his family again. His wife, Irina, and his two children, Alexei, age 14, and Katya, age 11, had been told he was dead. That was the protocol. When an agent was burned, the family was informed that there had been an accident, a heart attack, a sudden illness. The body would be cremated before anyone could ask questions. The family would grieve. And then, once the agent had safely returned to Moscow, the truth would be revealed. It was a necessary cruelty, designed to protect the family from suspicion and to give the agent time to escape. Dmitri had accepted this. He had known the risks when he volunteered. He had been prepared to endure months, maybe even a year, of separation. But he had also been promised that his family would be waiting for him when he came home. That was the deal. That was the only thing that had kept him sane during those 11 days in the darkness of the cargo hold. And now, standing on a street corner in Moscow with the autumn wind cutting through his coat, he realized that the deal had been broken. The next morning, Dmitri went to the main office of the KGB on Lubyanka Square. The building was a massive block of yellow stone, its facade heavy and impassive, its windows like closed eyes. It had been the headquarters of Soviet state security since the days of the Cheka, and its basement cells had swallowed more lives than anyone could count. To walk through its doors was to step into the machinery of power, a place where individual lives were measured only by their usefulness to the state. He stood in line for 20 minutes before reaching the reception desk. The woman behind the counter was in her 40s, with thin lips and a gaze that suggested she had heard every excuse and believed none of them. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Dmitri Volkov. I need to speak with someone in the First Chief Directorate. Regarding a personnel matter, I was an operative in the United States. I returned last week and I need to verify the status of my family." The woman finally looked at him. Her expression didn't change. "Do you have identification?" He handed her his passport. She examined it, made a note on a pad of paper, and picked up a phone. She spoke in a low voice for a minute, then hung up and returned his passport. "Wait over there," she said, nodding toward a row of wooden benches against the wall. He sat and waited. Around him other people came and went, men in uniforms, women in dark dresses, clerks carrying folders. No one spoke. The only sound was the click of heels on the marble floor and the occasional ring of a telephone. After an hour, a man in a gray suit appeared and called his name. Dmitri followed him down a corridor, up a flight of stairs, and into a small office with a single desk and 2 chairs. The walls were bare. The window overlooked an inner courtyard where nothing moved. The man sat behind the desk and gestured for Dmitri to sit. He was in his 50s, with thinning hair and the calm, unreadable expression of someone who had spent a lifetime asking questions and weighing answers. "Comrade Volkov," the man said, "I understand you have concerns about your family." "I went to my apartment yesterday," Dmitri said. "They're not there. The woman living there said she's been there since 1977. I was told my family would be waiting for me when I returned." The man opened a folder on his desk and scanned the pages inside. "According to our records, you were assigned to the United States in 1973 under the operational name Thomas Brennan. You returned to the Soviet Union on September 17, 1985, following a security compromise. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And you believe you had a family here in Moscow before your deployment?" Dmitri stared at him. "Believe? I know I did. My wife's name is Irina Volkova. We were married in 1970. We have 2 children, Alexei and Katya." The man looked at him with the same flat, professional gaze. "Comrade Volkov, I have reviewed your file. There is no record of a marriage. There is no record of any children. According to our documentation, you were unmarried at the time of your deployment." The words landed like stones. "That's impossible," Dmitri said slowly. "I remember them. I remember my wedding. I remember holding my son when he was born. I remember—" "Memory can be unreliable," the man interrupted, "especially under conditions of prolonged stress. You spent 12 years living under a false identity, maintaining a cover story, operating in a hostile environment. It's not uncommon for operatives to experience confusion upon return. Sometimes the lines between the real and the constructed become blurred." "I'm not confused," Dmitri said, his voice rising. "I know what I remember. I had a family. They lived in Building 7, Apartment 34, in the Severnoye Chertonovo district. Irina worked as a schoolteacher. Alexei wanted to be an engineer. Katya loved to draw. These are not fantasies. These are real people." The man closed the folder. "I understand this is difficult, but the records are clear. There is no Irina Volkova registered as your spouse. There are no children registered under your name. I'm afraid you may be mistaken." "Then show me the records," Dmitri demanded. "Show me the marriage registry. Show me the housing assignments. Let me see the documentation." "That's not possible. Personnel files are classified. I'm asking about my own life. And I'm telling you that according to the official records, the life you're describing does not exist." Dmitri sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He thought about the empty apartment, the woman in the faded housecoat, the green door he didn't recognize. He thought about the safe house with no furniture, the extraction team that never came, the silence that had greeted him when he arrived in Moscow. "What happened to them?" he asked quietly. "Nothing happened to them," the man said, "because they were never here. You erased them." The man's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation, comrade, is it? Or is it standard procedure? I was a liability. I was compromised. Maybe they decided my family was a liability too. Maybe they decided it was easier to make them disappear than to deal with the complications. You're being paranoid." "Paranoia is a survival skill in this line of work." The man stood up. "This conversation is over. You'll be assigned temporary housing while we process your reintegration. Someone will contact you within the week. In the meantime, I'd suggest you rest. You've had a difficult journey. I want to file a formal inquiry. You're welcome to do so. It won't change the records." Dmitri rose from his chair. "What if I go to the press? What if I tell someone what happened?" The man walked to the door and opened it. "Then you'll be arrested for disclosing state secrets. And after that, no one will ever hear from you again. Do you understand, Comrade Volkov?" Dmitri looked into the man's eyes and saw nothing. No anger, no sympathy, no emotion at all. Just the cold efficiency of a machine that had learned to operate without feeling. He walked out of the office, down the corridor, and out into the September air. The sky above Lubyanka Square was gray and heavy, promising rain. He spent the next week living in a small hotel near the Kiev train station. The room smelled like cigarettes and old carpet. The window overlooked a street where buses rumbled past at all hours. He barely slept. When he did, he dreamed of green doors and empty rooms. During the day, he walked. He went to the housing office and asked to see the records for Building 7, Apartment 34. The clerk told him the records were not available to the public. He went to the school where Irina had worked and asked if anyone remembered her. The principal said there was no teacher by that name in their records. He went to the registry office and asked to see his marriage certificate. The clerk searched the files and found nothing. Everywhere he went, he was met with the same answer: no record, no documentation, no proof. It was as if Irina, Alexei, and Katya had never existed, but he knew they had. He carried the memories like scars, small, precise, undeniable. He remembered the birthmark on Irina's left shoulder. He remembered the way Alexei's voice cracked when he laughed. He remembered Katya's drawings taped to the refrigerator, all bright colors and impossible animals. He remembered the smell of their apartment, and bread, and the faint scent of Irina's perfume. Something floral and cheap that she bought from the state store. Those memories were real. And if the state had decided to erase them from the records, it meant someone had made a decision. Someone had looked at his file and decided that his family was expendable. Someone had signed an order. And Dmitri realized, sitting alone in his hotel room with the rain tapping against the window, that he had two choices. He could accept what he had been told, that his memories were false, that he was confused, that his family had never existed. He could live with that lie, settle into a new life, and try to forget. Or he could find out the truth. On the 8th day, he went to see an old friend. Gregory Petrov had been his training officer during his early days with the KGB. They'd spent 6 months together in a dacha outside Moscow, learning the craft of deep cover, how to adopt a new identity, how to maintain operational security, how to lie convincingly to everyone, including yourself. Gregory had been in his 40s then, a veteran of the Second World War and a dozen covert operations. Now he was in his 60s, retired, living in a quiet neighborhood near Gorky Park. Dmitri found him sitting on a bench outside his building, feeding pigeons from a paper bag. Gregory looked up when Dmitri approached, and for a moment his eyes narrowed, then recognition flickered, and he smiled. "Volkov," he said, "I heard you were back. Can we talk?" Gregory glanced around. The street was empty except for an old woman sweeping the sidewalk. "Walk with me," he said. They walked through the park, past the bare trees and the empty flower beds. The afternoon light was pale and cold. Gregory didn't speak until they were far from any buildings. "So," he said finally. "What happened?" Dmitri told him everything. The blown cover, the extraction, the empty apartment, the missing records. Gregory listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When Dmitri finished, Gregory was silent for a long time. Then he sighed. "Do you know what the worst part of this job is?" Gregory asked. "Tell me. It's not the danger. It's not the lying. It's the fact that once you're inside, you never know where the truth ends and the performance begins. You lie so much that you start to lie to yourself. And the people you work for, they know that. They count on it. You think I'm imagining things." "No," Gregory said. "I think you're remembering correctly, and I think that's exactly why they erased your family." Dmitri stopped walking. "What do you mean?" Gregory turned to face him. "You are compromised. That means someone, somewhere, knows who you really are. Which means they know you have a family. And that makes your family a security risk. If the Americans ever figure out where they are, they can use them as leverage against you, against the state. So the state removes the leverage. It's simple math. By erasing them from the records. By making them disappear, completely. No records, no evidence, no trace. As if they never existed. It's cleaner that way. No questions, no loose ends. You're saying they killed them." Gregory looked away. "I'm saying the state protects itself." "That's what it does. That's what it's always done." Dmitri felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Where would they have sent them? If they're not dead, where are they? I don't know, maybe a work camp. Maybe reassignment to a different city under new identities. Maybe they're in a facility somewhere waiting to see if you become a problem. How do I find them? You don't, Gregory said flatly. You accept what happened and move on. That's the only way to survive this. I can't do that, then you're a fool. They stood in silence, the wind rustling through the dry grass. There's something else you should know, Gregory said quietly. The reason I'm telling you this, the reason I'm even talking to you right now, what? They're watching you. They've been watching since the day you arrived. You went to Lubyanka, you filed questions, you made noise. That means you're on a list now. And if you keep digging, if you keep asking questions, they won't just erase your records. They'll erase you. Dmitri looked at his old friend and saw the fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, but fear for what Dmitri was about to do. Thank you for telling me, Dmitri said. Gregory shook his head. Don't thank me. Just stay alive. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the gray afternoon. Dmitri stood alone in the park, watching the pigeons peck at the cold ground. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of smoke and distant rain. He thought about Irina, about Alexei, about Katya, and he made his decision. There are men who break under pressure, and there are men who harden. Dmitri Volkov had spent 12 years living as someone else, carrying secrets that could start wars, sleeping beside people who didn't know his real name. He had learned to compartmentalize fear, to function while drowning, to smile while his mind calculated escape routes and contingency plans. The KGB had trained him to be unbreakable. Now he would use that training against them, but he would need leverage, and leverage required information. He started by visiting the Lenin State Library, the largest in the Soviet Union, a massive neoclassical building that housed millions of documents, journals, and records. He spent 3 days in the reading room, searching through old newspapers and housing registry publications from the 1970s. He found nothing about his family, but he found something else: patterns. Small announcements in the back pages, names that appeared and then vanished. Families that moved without forwarding addresses. People who simply ceased to exist in the public record. It wasn't unusual. The Soviet system moved people around like chess pieces, reassignments, relocations, disappearances that were never explained. But there was a rhythm to it, a bureaucratic signature. Dmitri began to see the shape of something larger. On the 4th day, he went to a small cafe near the university district. It was the kind of place where students and intellectuals gathered, where conversations were loud enough to mask private words. He ordered tea and waited. At 3 o'clock, a woman in her 30s entered. She wore a gray coat and carried a canvas bag filled with books. She ordered coffee, sat 2 tables away, and opened a paperback novel. After 10 minutes, she got up to use the bathroom. When she returned, she sat at Dmitri's table. "You're taking a risk," she said quietly, not looking at him. "I don't have a choice." Her name was Vera Kashin, and she worked as an archivist at the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Dmitri had known her briefly during his training. She had been a liaison for document preparation, someone who understood how to create and destroy paper trails. She had left the KGB in 1979, citing health reasons, but Dmitri suspected the truth was more complicated. People who left the security services rarely did so cleanly. "What do you need?" she asked. "Housing records, marriage registry, birth certificates, anything that would prove my family existed. And if I find nothing, then I need to know where they would have gone. Work camps, reassignment centers, internal exile locations, anywhere the state sends people it wants to forget." Vera stirred her coffee slowly. "Do you understand what you're asking me to do?" "Yes." "And you understand what will happen to me if I'm caught?" "Yes." She was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'll see what I can find. Meet me here in 3 days. Same time. If I'm not here, don't come back." She stood, picked up her bag, and walked out. Dmitri finished his tea and left 10 minutes later. The city felt different now. Every street corner seemed to hide a watcher. Every stranger's glance felt like surveillance. Dmitri had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, of moving through a city without leaving a trace. Now he was the one being hunted, and he felt the weight of eyes on him at all times. He changed hotels twice. He varied his routes, never walking the same path twice. He bought a coat from a second-hand shop and a hat to obscure his face. He stopped carrying his briefcase and instead kept his documents in his pockets, ready to be destroyed at a moment's notice. At night, lying in anonymous beds in anonymous rooms, he thought about the life he had lived in America. It had been a fiction, a performance, but it had also been real. He had felt real emotions, made real connections. He had learned to care about the people around him, even knowing it was temporary, even knowing he would one day disappear from their lives without explanation. There had been a woman in Arlington, a neighbor named Susan, who worked as a nurse at the VA hospital. They had talked sometimes, standing in their driveways on Saturday mornings. She had invited him to dinner once. He had declined, citing work obligations. He wondered if she had noticed when he disappeared. He wondered if anyone had told her what had happened, or if she had simply assumed he had moved away. He wondered if she had been real at all, or if she too had been part of the machinery, a CIA plant, monitoring him, waiting for him to make a mistake. In the Cold War, nothing was certain. Every relationship was suspect. Every friendship could be a trap. And after a while, you stopped trusting anyone, including yourself. 3 days later, Dmitri returned to the cafe. Vera was already there, sitting at the same table, reading the same book. He sat down across from her. "I found something," she said without looking up. "What?" "Your marriage record. It was filed in 1970, but it was deleted from the Central Registry in 1973. 3 months after you left for America." Dmitri felt his pulse quicken. Deleted how? Not deleted. Reclassified. Moved to a restricted archive. The kind that requires special authorization to access. "What about birth records for my children?" "Same thing. Filed, then reclassified. All within a 6-month window after your deployment. So they existed." "Yes, but officially they don't anymore." "Where are they now?" Vera closed her book. "I don't know, but I found something else. A housing reassignment order from 1974. Your wife and children were moved from your apartment in Moscow to a facility in the Urals, a closed administrative zone." "What kind of facility?" "I don't know. The order didn't specify. But closed zones are usually military installations, research centers, or prisons." Vera nodded. "Or something like them." Dmitri felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "Do you have an address?" "A region. Sverdlovsk Oblast, near the town of Verkhachuri. That's all I could find." "Is there anything else?" "One more thing." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This was attached to the reassignment order. "It's a memo from the KGB First Chief Directorate. It's addressed to the director of the facility." She handed him the paper. Dmitri unfolded it carefully. The text was brief, typed on official letterhead. Subject: Relocation of Family Unit Volkov. The subjects are to be maintained under strict observation until further notice. No external contact permitted. Status to be reviewed upon completion of operatives' foreign assignment. In the event of operatives' death or capture, subjects are to be reclassified as state dependents and reassigned accordingly. No records of prior identity are to be preserved. Dmitri read the words twice. Then he folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Vera replied. "Just don't get caught. If they trace this back to me, I'll deny everything. I understand." She stood and left without another word. Dmitri sat alone for a few minutes, staring at the cold tea in front of him. Then he stood, paid, and walked out into the gray afternoon. Sverdlovsk Oblast was a vast region in the Urals, a landscape of forests, mountains, and industrial towns built around mines and factories. Verkhachuri was a small town on the northern edge of the region, remote and isolated. The kind of place where the state could hide things it didn't want found. Dmitri knew he couldn't simply travel there and start asking questions. The facility would be guarded. His presence would be reported. If they were watching him, and Gregory had warned him then any attempt to reach his family would be seen as confirmation that he was a security risk. He needed a cover story. He needed documentation that would allow him to travel without raising suspicion, and he needed help. It took him 2 weeks to arrange. He found a man named Leonid, a former KGB logistics officer who had been quietly dismissed in 1982 for unspecified administrative failures. Leonid lived in a basement apartment in the Izmailovo district and made a living forging travel permits and identity documents for people who needed to move through the Soviet system without attracting attention. Dmitry paid him with the last of his American dollars. "Where are you going?" Leonid asked as he worked. "Verkhovturi, Sverdlovsk Oblast." "What's there? A factory? I'm supposed to consult on technical documentation? Translation work?" Leonid didn't believe him, but he didn't ask further questions. He handed Dmitry a set of papers, a travel permit, a work order, and a temporary residency stamp for the Sverdlovsk region. "These will get you there," Leonid said. "But they won't protect you if someone looks too closely. Don't stay long." "I won't." Dmitry took the documents and left. The train to Sverdlovsk took 2 days. Dmitry traveled in a third-class compartment surrounded by workers and soldiers heading east. No one spoke much. The countryside outside the window was a blur of gray fields and skeletal forests, interrupted occasionally by industrial complexes that belched smoke into the colorless sky. He arrived in Sverdlovsk on a cold October morning. The city was a sprawl of factories and concrete apartment blocks built to serve the mines and military installations that dotted the region. The air smelled like coal and metal. The streets were wide and empty. He took a bus north to Verkhovturi. The road wound through pine forests and past abandoned villages, their wooden houses slowly collapsing under the weight of neglect. The bus driver said nothing, his eyes fixed on the road, his face weathered and expressionless. Verkhovturi was smaller than Dmitry had imagined, a town of perhaps 5,000 people, clustered around an old monastery and a handful of Soviet-era administrative buildings. The streets were unpaved. The houses were mostly wooden, painted in faded blues and yellows. There was one hotel, a 2-story building near the town square. Dmitry checked in and asked the clerk where the nearest industrial facility was. "You mean the compound?" the clerk asked. "Is that what it's called?" "That's what everyone calls it. It's 15 kilometers north, but you can't go there. It's restricted." "I have authorization," Dmitry said, showing his forged work order. The clerk glanced at it and shrugged. "Bus leaves at 7 in the morning. Comes back at 6. You'll need to show your papers at the gate." "Thank you." Dmitry went to his room and waited. The compound was surrounded by a high fence topped with barbed wire. Guard towers stood at each corner, their searchlights dark in the daylight. A single gate controlled access, manned by 2 soldiers in heavy coats. Beyond the fence, Dmitry could see a cluster of low buildings, barracks, administrative offices, and what looked like a central hall. He approached the gate with his documents ready. One of the soldiers examined them carefully, then picked up a phone and made a call. After a few minutes, he handed the papers back. "Wait here," the soldier said. Dmitry waited. The wind cut through his coat. The forest around the compound was silent except for the occasional crack of a branch. After 10 minutes, a man in a civilian suit emerged from the administrative building and walked to the gate. He was in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime giving orders. "You're the translator?" the man asked. "Yes. I wasn't informed of any consultants coming." "It was a last-minute request," Dmitry said, keeping his voice calm. "There's a backlog of technical documents that need review. I'm here to help clear it." The man studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Follow me." They walked through the gate and across the compound. Dmitry counted the buildings, 8 in total. The central hall was the largest, a 2-story structure with narrow windows. The barracks were smaller, arranged in rows. Smoke rose from several chimneys. "What is this place?" Dmitry asked. "A resettlement facility," the man said. "We provide housing and work for families that have been relocated for security reasons." "What kind of work?" "Whatever is needed. Manufacturing, agriculture, administrative tasks. Everyone contributes. They entered the administrative building. Inside, the air was warm and smelled like paper and tobacco. The man led Dmitri to a small office and gestured for him to sit. "I'll need to verify your credentials," the man said. "It will take a few hours. You're welcome to wait here." "Thank you," the man left, closing the door behind him. Dmitri sat in the chair and looked around the office. There was a desk, a filing cabinet, a calendar on the wall showing October 1985. He could hear voices in the hallway, footsteps, the distant clatter of a typewriter. He waited. After an hour, the door opened. A different man entered, this one younger, wearing a military uniform. He didn't sit. "Come with me," he said. Dmitri followed him out of the office, down a corridor, and into a larger room that looked like an interrogation chamber. A single table, 2 chairs, a light overhead. "Sit," the man said. Dmitri sat. "Your documents are forgeries," the man said flatly. "There is no technical consultancy scheduled for this facility. There is no backlog of documents. And there is no record of anyone named." He glanced at the papers. "Mikhail Sorokin, in the Ministry of Industry." Dmitri said nothing. "Who are you really?" "My name is Dmitri Volkov. I'm a former KGB operative. I was deployed to the United States under deep cover. I returned last month. I believe my family is being held here." The man stared at him. "You just confessed to espionage and document fraud. I'm aware. Why?" "Because I don't care anymore. I want to see my family. If they're here, I want to know they're alive. After that, you can do whatever you want with me." The man sat down across from him. "Do you understand what you've done? By coming here, by trying to access a restricted facility, you've confirmed that you're a security risk. You've proven that you can't be trusted." "I know." "Then why did you do it?" Dmitri looked at him. "Because they're my family, and I've already lost everything else." The man was silent for a long time. Then he stood. "Wait here." He left the room. Dmitri heard the lock click. He sat in the chair, listening to the silence. He thought about Irina, about the way she used to braid Katya's hair in the morning before school. He thought about Alexei, about the way he used to sit at the kitchen table with his school books, frowning in concentration. He thought about all the small moments he had missed, birthdays, school plays, first days of work, last days of innocence. He had given the state 12 years of his life. He had lied for them, risked his life for them, betrayed people who had trusted him. And in return, the state had taken his family and erased them as if they had never existed. He wondered if they had done the same to others. He wondered how many families had been disappeared, how many names had been deleted from the records, how many people had been swallowed by the machinery of secrecy and control. The door opened. The man in the gray suit entered, the one who had met him at the gate. "Come with me," he said. Dmitri stood and followed him out of the building, across the compound, toward one of the barracks. The man unlocked the door and gestured for Dmitri to enter. Inside, the barracks was divided into small rooms, each with a bed, a table, and a window. The man led him to a room at the end of the hall and knocked. A woman's voice answered. "Yes?" The man opened the door. Irina was sitting at the table sewing. She looked up and froze. Dmitri stepped into the room. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Irina stood. Her face was older, thinner, marked by years Dmitri hadn't been there to see. Her hair, once dark and full, was streaked with gray. But her eyes were the same. "Dmitri?" she whispered. "It's me." She crossed the room and touched his face as if to make sure he was real. Then she collapsed against him, and he held her, feeling the weight of all the years he had been gone. Behind them, the man in the gray suit cleared his throat. "You have 10 minutes, he said. Then he left, closing the door. Dmitri pulled back and looked at Irina. "Where are the children?" "They're working," she said, her voice breaking. "Alexei is in the machine shop. Katya is in the textile factory. They'll be back tonight. Are you all right? Have they hurt you?" "No, we're kept here, we work, we live, but we're not free." She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "They told us you were dead. They told us you died in America. And then, years later, they said you were alive, but that we couldn't see you. That we were a security risk. I know. I found out when I came back. They erased all the records. They made it look like you never existed. Why? Because I was compromised. And they couldn't risk the Americans using you against me. Irina wiped her eyes. So they locked us away. Like we were criminals. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. You were doing your duty. No, Dmitri said. I was doing what I was told. And I didn't ask enough questions. They sat on the bed, holding hands. Outside, the wind rattled the window. The light was fading. What are you going to do? Irina asked. I'm going to tell the truth. They'll kill you. Probably. But maybe someone will listen. Maybe someone will care. And us? I don't know. But at least I know you're alive. At least I know I'm not crazy. Irina smiled, sad and tired. You were never crazy, Dmitri. You were just loyal. And they used that against you. The door opened. The man in the gray suit stood in the threshold. Time's up. Dmitri stood. He looked at Irina one last time. I'll find a way to get you out. Don't make promises you can't keep. I love you. I love you too. He turned and walked out, and the door closed behind him. They took him back to Moscow the next day under guard. He was held in a detention cell at Lubyanka for a week. No one questioned him. No one spoke to him. He was simply kept, like an object waiting to be disposed of. On the 8th day they released him. No explanation, no charges. Just a guard who unlocked the door and told him he was free to go. Dmitri walked out into the November cold. The streets of Moscow were covered in early snow, the buildings gray against the white sky. He went to his hotel, gathered his belongings, and sat down to write. He wrote for 3 days. He wrote about his life as Thomas Brennan. He wrote about the secrets he had stolen, the lies he had told, the people he had betrayed. He wrote about the night he had to run, the cargo ship, the darkness, the hope that had kept him alive during those 11 days. And he wrote about what he found when he came home. The empty apartment, the missing records, the bureaucrat who told him his family didn't exist, the facility in the Urals, the 10 minutes with Irina, the weight of her in his arms, the knowledge that she and his children were alive but imprisoned. He wrote it all down, every detail, every name, every lie. When he finished, he made 3 copies. He mailed one to a friend in East Germany, someone he had known during his training, someone who might have the connections to get it to the West. He mailed another to a journalist in Leningrad who had a reputation for publishing things the state didn't want published. And the 3rd copy he kept. He knew what would happen next. He had known since the moment he decided to come back to Moscow. The state didn't forgive. The state didn't forget. And the state didn't allow its secrets to be exposed. But he also knew that silence was complicity, that to say nothing was to accept what had been done, and he couldn't do that. Not anymore. On November 28, 1985, Dmitry Volkov walked into the offices of Literaturnaya Gazeta, a literary newspaper that had occasionally published politically sensitive material. He carried the 3rd copy of his manuscript in a manila envelope. He handed it to a young editor and said, "This is the truth. Do with it what you will." The editor looked at him, confused. What is this? A confession, a warning, a record. It doesn't matter what you call it. Just make sure someone reads it. He left before the editor could ask any questions. That night he returned to his hotel room and waited. At 3 in the morning there was a knock on the door. He opened it. 2 men stood in the hallway wearing dark coats. They didn't identify themselves. They didn't need to. "Comrade Volkov," one of them said. "Please come with us." Dmitri nodded. He put on his coat, picked up his briefcase, empty now, everything written, everything sent, and followed them into the night. They drove through the empty streets of Moscow, past the silent buildings and the frozen river. No one spoke. The city looked peaceful under the snow, like a painting of a place that had never been real. They took him to a building on the outskirts of the city, not Lubyanka, but somewhere smaller, quieter. They led him down a flight of stairs, through a narrow corridor, and into a windowless room with concrete walls. One of the men gestured to a chair. "Sit." Dmitri sat. "You've caused a significant problem, Comrade Volkov. I told the truth. The truth is what the state decides it is. Then the state is a lie." The man slapped him. Not hard. Just enough to make the point. You had a chance to live quietly. You could have accepted your new life, served the motherland in some other capacity, and been taken care of. But you chose to betray us. I chose to find my family. Your family is a state asset. You have no claim to them. They're human beings. They're property. Just like you. Dmitri looked at the man and he felt nothing. No fear, no anger. Just a profound emptiness. The kind that comes when you realize that the thing you believed in was hollow all along. "What happens now?" Dmitri asked. "That depends. If you cooperate, if you disavow the document you tried to publish, if you admit that you were mentally unstable and fabricated the entire story, then perhaps we can find a solution. And if I don't, then you'll disappear. Just like your family, just like everyone who becomes inconvenient." Dmitri sat back in the chair. He thought about Irina, about the 10 minutes they had together. He thought about Alexei and Katya working in a factory somewhere in the Urals. Growing up without a father, believing he was dead or that he had abandoned them. He thought about all the other families, all the other people who had been swallowed by the machine, erased from history as if they had never mattered. And he made his choice. "No," he said. The man stared at him. "No? I won't disavow anything. I won't lie anymore. If you want to erase me, go ahead. But you can't erase the truth. It's already out there." The man smiled, cold, empty, clinical. "You think one document will change anything? You think anyone will care? Maybe not. But at least I'll know I tried." The man stood. "Very well, Comrade Volkov. You've made your decision." He walked to the door, paused, and looked back. "For what it's worth, your family won't be harmed. They'll remain where they are. They'll live. They just won't be yours anymore." "They were never mine," Dmitri said quietly. "They were always theirs." The man nodded and left. Dmitri sat alone in the concrete room, listening to the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. He didn't know how much time he had left. Hours, maybe days. It didn't matter. He had done what he could. He had spoken the truth. And whatever came next, he would face it knowing that he had refused to be silent. Epilogue, the document Dmitri Volkov tried to publish, never reached the Western press. The copy mailed to East Germany was intercepted. The copy mailed to the journalist in Leningrad was confiscated during a raid on the journalist's apartment. The copy given to Literaturnaya Gazeta was handed over to the KGB within hours. Dmitri Volkov was officially declared deceased in December 1985, the cause listed as heart failure. No body was ever recovered. No funeral was held. His name was removed from all official records. Irina, Alexei, and Katya Volkova remained at the resettlement facility in Sverdlovsk Oblast until 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. After their release, they moved to a small town in the Urals and lived quietly. They never spoke publicly about what had happened. In 1993, a researcher examining declassified KGB files found a fragmentary copy of a handwritten document describing a deep-cover operative who returned to Moscow and found his family erased from the records. The document was incomplete and heavily redacted. The name of the operative was not included. The file was marked, "Security threat, neutralized." The Cold War did not end with heroes or villains. It ended with silence, the silence of people who had lived in fear for so long they forgot what it felt like to speak freely. And in that silence, stories like Dmitri Volkov's disappeared, folded into the vast archive of secrets that no one wanted to remember. But stories, like ghosts, have a way of surviving. They linger in the margins. They whisper through cracks in the walls. They wait for someone to find them, to listen, to understand that behind every classified document and every erased name was a human being who hoped, who loved, who tried to protect the people they cared about, and who was betrayed by the very system they had served. If stories like this make you reflect on how fragile truth really was and how easily it can be erased, consider subscribing. There are many more Cold War stories that should never be forgotten. Because history doesn't just belong to the powerful. It belongs to the people who lived it, suffered through it, and refused to be silent, even when silence was the only safe choice.